His name is Carlin Georgescu, and after a resounding victory in the first round of the Romanian presidential election, he sent shockwaves through the corridors of power in Davos, the EU, NATO, and the United Nations. Stay with us as we delve into his explosive revelations about the global elite, their hidden agendas, and why they're desperately trying to silence him. Georgescu's groundbreaking presidential campaign could not have arrived at a more critical moment. The global elite are in panic mode, pulling every string to cling to their power and push forward their Agenda 2030 and so-called Sustainable Development Goals. Their aim? To impose a dystopian technocratic system that threatens to enslave humanity under the guise of progress. The global elite thought they had Romania under control. They thought the Romanian people would quietly accept their agenda, content to own nothing and pretend to be happy. They couldn't have been more wrong. Make no mistake, people are waking up. They're demanding justice, and the cracks in the system are growing. One by one, the dominoes are falling, and this movement is spreading across the globe.
With more than 99% of the votes counted in the first round of Romania's presidential election, a far-right pro-Russia candidate has taken the lead. Carlin Georgescu has an unassailable lead of more than 300,000 votes. He has no political party and is known as the TikTok candidate after he used the social media platform to galvanize his support by calling for an end to aid for Ukraine. He's also sounded a skeptical note on Romania's NATO membership.
If the deep state bureaucrats thought Hungarian President Viktor Orban was a problem for them and their funding for the proxy war in Ukraine, wait till they meet Romania's future president Carlin Georgescu.
Ne trebuie să vorbim de pace.
Vă rog, aveți această posibilitate. Cât de departe sunt discuțiile de pace dintre Rusia și Ucraina?
Eu vorbesc de țara noastră, dumneavoastră vorbiți de alte țări. Nu este treaba noastră.
Și pe noi, să știți.
V-am spus mai devreme, observator. Noi nu avem de ce să ne implicăm, nu este treaba noastră. Prin urmare, cred că trebuie să ne preocupe în mod special poporul român și doar poporul român și noi trebuie să avem strategia păcii.
It's no surprise that the global elite and their so-called liberal rules-based international order fear this man with a fervour that borders on sheer panic. He has no time for their rules, and they can't afford to let another country escape from their icy grip. While the elites were busy spreading fear and mandating vaccines, Georgescu stood apart. He journeyed to a frozen lake in the stunning Carpathian Mountains, urging people to reconnect with nature and build their immune systems naturally, rather than relying on vaccines.
Am încredere în sistemul meu imunitar, pentru că am încredere și credință deplină în Creatorul lui, în Dumnezeu. Imunitatea mea ține de suveranitatea ființei mele. Imunitatea se întreține și se antrenează doar în natură. Aici este realitatea, aici este informația, nu în laborator. De aceea nu mi-este frig. Nu simt frigul, simt puterea, simt că trăiesc, sunt liber.
Georgescu also understands that climate change is the hoax of the century, elaborately designed by the elite to further enrich themselves and their clients, while impoverishing the Western world and forcing its citizens to demean themselves and live in a form of slavery.
And the main pillar for both United Nations and Club of Rome, and this was the reason for me to left both organizations, is what is happened today, and this is the main pillar of them, which is called climate change. Climate change is a big fraud, one of the biggest frauds of the history of the planet.
Georgescu spent 17 years working in senior roles at the United Nations and rubbing shoulders with the elite. He has had various offices within the organisation, including Senior Fellow, Special Rapporteur and Executive Director. He is a real UN insider, and this is why his revelations about the COVID pandemic and climate change could not be more important. He also speaks with real authority about the problem of elite paedophilia in globalist circles. 8 million children go missing in the world every year, and many of them end up in the hands of elite paedophiles who run the world. Because, as Carlin Georgescu explains, the elite use a paedophilia system.
UN could be a fantastic, can have the fantastic role, but is not, because it's totally under control of the oligarchs. The problem is that these oligarchs, all of them, are related with the system of the pedophilia one, because we know that there are more than 8 million children per year which they disappear. 8 million does mean the entire population of Austria. They disappear without any information, simply like that.
The implications of Georgescu's revelations are nothing short of seismic. They threaten to dismantle the carefully crafted illusions surrounding some of the world's most powerful figures, presidents, royalty, Hollywood elites, and those entrusted to govern our nations. Under any legal or moral framework, the actions he describes amounts to crimes of the highest order, unforgivable acts that demand retribution. This is a moment of reckoning the world can no longer ignore. Revelations strike at the heart of a global system that has operated in the shadows for far too long. The World Economic Forum, in conjunction with the UN, has ordered governments around the world to move towards decriminalizing child rape and paedophilia. A report from the United Nations has called for all forms of drug use and sexual activity to be decriminalized globally, including paedophilia, bestiality, and incest. Written by the International Committee of Jurists, ICJ, UNAIDS, and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the report was released on International Women's Day, with the goal of guiding the application of international human rights law to criminal law. Called the 8th March Principles, the report calls for offences related to drugs and sex, including paedophilia and incest, to be decriminalised. According to the legal experts at the United Nations and WEF, laws against paedophilia constitute an attack on the human rights of, wait for it, children. That's right. According to the globalist elite, the age of consent is a discriminatory concept that discriminates against children who want to have sex with adults. Minors, of course, cannot truly consent to sex with an adult, something these so-called experts should know. This is just another evil policy pushed by the globalist elite on the unsuspecting citizens of Western countries. If you're struggling to understand how anyone could argue that laws against paedophilia somehow infringe on the rights of children, you need to remember one thing. To the globalist elite, up is down, war is peace, and bad is good. We've now entered the phase of their agenda where they're no longer hiding their intentions. They're openly rubbing our faces in it.
Still the adult child sex, that's always a big seller.
Oh, yeah. Well, that
I had good friends who said, "Are you crazy? Do not write that book."
Man, listen, you're talking to a guy who for 25 years has been making arguments more or less in defense of adult child sex in classrooms. And I don't know if it's the same argument as yours, but I even authored a piece in the Daily Beast in which I called into question the age of consent laws. Which is, and I brought to bear the arguments I was making in class, and I'm going to see whether they jibe.
The right infringement case that we don't get, they can't give their valid consent, and therefore it's wrong in virtue of being a right infringement. And there's a view that it's exploitative, that even if it's not harmful, and even if it's not a right infringement, it's somehow an exploitation.
Right. I've heard all these. Yes. Okay.
Right. So those are the three dominant arguments. None of these convince me. So me
neither.
The harm argument. Well, there's actual empirical controversy over this.
Sure. Yeah.
On the rights-based argument, I think, look, we make children do all sorts of things that we don't want to do. Right?
Thank you.
We make them go to church. We make them go to the temple. We tell them to go to school. They got to go to the dentist. They got to go to their sister's ballet recital. And we don't care what they say. And they want to do things. We say no, right? They say, I want to stay up and watch, Creature Feature on WPIX until, 2 in the morning. We say, well, it's tough.
That is all a child's life is coercion.
Right, that's right.
Is coercion by adults often to make the child do something for the adult's pleasure only.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
You say, you're going to go to your great uncle's funeral, even though you want to go, and even though it's not in your interest.
Liberal academics have redefined child rapists as minor attracted persons. And the point, of course, is to send the message that actually it's not that big of a deal. It's just a different kind of love. Meet Miranda Galbraith, a counsellor and sex therapist who advocates for MAPS, or minor attracted persons. She says they are vilified and marginalised, and shouldn't be referred to as paedophiles.
Folks, my name is Miranda. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a licensed professional counselor and sex therapist in Erie, Pennsylvania. And today I want to talk about minor attracted persons. And I want to talk about minor attracted persons because they are probably the most vilified population of folks in our culture. And most folks are making incorrect assumptions about them without actually knowing much about them. And those assumptions create harm for an already marginalized population. You may have noticed that I'm using the term minor attracted persons, sometimes abbreviated to MAPS, instead of the more commonly used term pedophile. And I'm doing this because the term pedophile has moved from being a diagnostic label to being a judgmental, hurtful insult that we hurl at people in order to harm them or slander them. I also prefer person-first language that recognizes that any label we might apply to a person is only part of who they are and doesn't represent everything that they are. We are all people first with many different facets or parts of ourselves, and this includes folks who are attracted to minors.
This level of depravity is like a stain that refuses to be wiped away. It's time to clean it up once and for all, before the global elite succeed in normalizing it in school classrooms and society at large. As Carlene Georgescu explains, it's time for humanity to stand up and say no. No more degeneracy. No more fear-based programming. No more slavery. No more war. And no more globalism.
The problem is that the UN agenda is the same with Davos agenda. This, in fact, is my main topic for our conversation today. For this reason, this the world oligarchic system, they have the power on Europe because they control all the people like Bundeskanzler or president or prime minister or whatever there are. So for this reason, sorry to interrupt you, the situation with Donald Trump was a big shock.
They didn't expect that to happen. That was an accident, I suppose.
Absolutely an accident.
Not part of their game plan.
It was the first time of the oligarchy system was happened an accident. Because normally it have to be Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Not Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And the process which we are dealing now with this pandemic and all these liars was supposed to be in 2016.
They were pushed into
exactly,
early
in a
start.
sense, to be in 2020 to be a disaster regarding food and water.
I see.
Which normally they want to arrive in 2025 now.
I see.
So the plan was a little bit changed, and for this reason, of course they will not succeed. This is clear. I mean, the system is almost down. It's but of course there are the last moments, and we have to have the courage now, all of us, to say no.
Here at The People's Voice, we are determined to continue exposing the crimes of the global elite, but we